Welcome back. Air Force Chief of Staff General C.Q. Brown is sounding an alarm about modernizing his service. General Brown and the acting Air Force Secretary John Roth told the House Appropriations Defense Subcommittee they need more latitude to get rid of programs the force doesn't need anymore. General Larry Spencer, U.S. Air Force retired, is the former Vice Chief of the Air Force. Larry, welcome. It's great to see you again. General Brown and acting Secretary, Roth are not asking for anything that people haven't been asking for decades. Any sense of what might be different this time in trying to get some of these aging aircraft out of the Air Force and getting fresh pieces of equipment into the inventory?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, you know, when I read the most recent article, the thought that occurred to me was I could have written that article 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, because it hasn't changed. The Air Force has legacy systems that they need to retire and move on to a more modernized fleet. I think what may be different this time is the National Defense Strategy is pretty clear about what they want their Air Force to do. And I think now it's up to the Air Force to convince the folks on the Hill that the more modern systems, the more capable systems, will be more lethal, more efficient, and better serve the country going forward.
One of the elements of this in which you are an expert is the financial management aspect of this. We had Diana Maurer from the Government Accountability Office on the program last week talking about affordability in the out years of the F-35 program. One of the issues that Congress doesn't seem to have looked at very much in some of these other programs, I note from this Air Force Magazine article, Congress not sure about ABMS to replace the E-8C. The RQ-4 Global Hawk is a program that the Air Force wants to look at least cutting back on. Congress apprehensive, and so on. There's a long list of them we could go over, Larry. Has Congress considered, in your view, the long-term sustainability of these programs and what it's going to cost the Air Force in the out years to keep these things in the air?
It doesn't appear so. I mean, obviously, I can't speak for Congress, but when you look at the result, I mean, the sustainability costs of all of these systems are going to be unaffordable. It's just that simple. And one of the frustrations I had when I was on active duty and talking with folks on the Hill was they tend to look at Air Force capability by system, by airplane, and not by capability. So as an example, one of the issues that has been ongoing for years is the A-10. Close air support is a mission. It is not an airplane. And the Air Force has many other more modern airplanes that can provide close air support. But it seems like when you're on the Hill, folks get locked into, a platform. They get locked into a C-130, something they're familiar with, an F-15, something they're familiar with, and they miss the broader picture, the broader perspective of the Air Force has missions to perform. And the Air Force is probably best to determine what systems will best perform those missions. So I think we've got to elevate this discussion away from platforms and into what missions does the country need the Air Force to perform, and what platforms then better serve those missions.
I think your terminology is correct and maybe a little bit forgiving, Larry, as far as referring to programs that members of Congress are familiar with. Parochialism may be part of the problem. I quote from the Air Force Magazine article, Representative Tom Cole, one of the members of the Appropriations Committee, highlighted an effort by the Air Force in 2014 to cut E-3 AWACS in a reserve unit at Tinker Air Force Base, here's the key phrase, in his district. That's really the crux of the matter, isn't it, Larry? What's made in my district, what lives in my district or my state, right?
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, I think today there's not much that you can talk about that doesn't get political very quickly, and in particular systems and jobs in districts. So there's no escaping that. However, when particularly now as we're going into a period that I think most people predict, that the DoD budget, at best, will level off. A lot of folks speculate may dive down some. Where we spend these precious dollars are important. And this is, at the end of the day, this is about protecting the country, our nation, not about individual platforms in individual districts.
How would the Air Force and the other services, for that matter, when they talk about their legacy systems, make the argument in financial management terms that X program, whatever it is not financially sustainable, and that's the reason we need to cut it back. Is that a powerful enough argument, do you think, to contradict the desires of some members of Congress to keep the programs that are valuable to their districts politically?
Yeah, one of the things I think, one of the great things about the Air Force and the Space Force for that matter, but the Air Force in particular, is their missions are very diverse. It ranges from the nuclear mission to fighters to bombers to airplanes that carry logistical supplies to ISR. I mean, they have a very broad portfolio. And the challenge the Air Force has with that portfolio is how do they explain it in a way that folks will understand it, that it doesn't seem too complicated. So, for example, the Navy does a great job of selling, you pick the latest number, 350 ship Navy, 400 ship Navy, whatever that number is today, that sticks. How do you do that with the Air Force? How do you separate fighters from bombers, from a C-17 to similar in Space Force? How do you get an acronym or a one-sentence description around all of those capabilities so that someone can link onto it? There are folks in Congress today that are talking about how many ships the Navy needs. How many folks in Congress have you heard today talking about how many squadrons the Air Force needs? The number, I think the answer to that is zero. At least I haven't heard anyone. Primarily because, how are they going to explain the difference between a fighter squadron, and a C-17 squadron or a tanker squadron? How does that work? So the Air Force has got its hands full, and I think a lot of this revolves around communicating that message.
Larry Spencer, thanks very much. As always, a pleasure to have you on the program again.
Thank you so much for having me.